Welcome everyone. Jeff Jensen, Director of Community Programs here at Trees Forever. This is another Tree-mendous webinar where we're talking about growing our forestry, our community canopy. And this is an interesting topic today. We have Tivon Feeley with Iowa DNR, and he's going to be talking about forest health. And this is a very important topic because, of course, our forests are near and dear to our hearts here. We have a couple of things to go over real quick. Some upcoming webinars I want to let you know about. We have the Food Forest Forum coming up here in July. And then really specific to controlling invasive species, August 24th, Tivon will be back with us, Ticking Time Bomb. We're going to be talking about controlling invasive species. And I titled this one Ticking Time Bomb because we had the derecho come through that did a lot of damage in our urban and rural forests for that matter. And so we have a lot of holes where trees are knocked down. We have a lot more edge effect. And so that is prime real estate for invasives to get a foothold. And so we'll be talking about some options there. So don't miss out on that. If you need to access our woodland legacy information, that's going to be the upcoming webinars here in July and August. This is where you can find that on our Trees Forever website. This is what it looks like. This is where you can click to register for the Food Forest Forum. Or you can also register for the Ticking Time Bomb invasive species one. Okay, I think I've hit all of the bullet points. So with that, Tivon, let's see if we can't get your screen shared.
Like Jeff said, my name is Tivon Feeley, and I'm with the Iowa DNR. I've been there for quite a few years, and I'm the Forest Health Program Leader. And, we're talking about Iowa's tree health. So I thought we would start out with some of the overview. What are the top insects that I see impacting the state of Iowa and what they're doing to trees, the top diseases, and the non-native plants. And I'm going to end this whole presentation with what I think is probably the #1 threat to Iowa's forest right now that isn't human or environment. So we'll jump into this right away. Like Jeff said, if you have questions, just drop them into the chat and we will try to address those towards the end. So we're going to start out with our insects. The first insect is one of my favorites to watch. We do not have this in Iowa, and that's important to start out with. This is called Asian longhorn beetle. This is a very large longhorn beetle. And you can see that it's about the size of my thumb if you were to hold up your thumb, and the antennae are as long or longer than the body. That makes it a longhorn beetle. And if you look very closely at the legs, you'll see these blue stripes on it. There are a couple beetles in Iowa that look kind of similar. I think the one that's probably the closest is called the pine sawyer beetle. It's a black beetle with white dots, but it doesn't have the blue bands on its legs, but it will have a similar antennae. And you'll find it on pine trees. So that's one way you can distinguish this beetle from others. All right, so Asian longhorn beetle, let's talk about it. So this is an insect that feeds on many species of trees, primarily the maples. We'll find them on willows, elm, horse chestnut, sycamore. The list is pretty extensive. But unlike emerald ash borer, they don't feed just behind the bark. They like to get into the center of the tree, kind of hollow it out and kill it within a year. It takes a few years for emerald ash borer to kill a tree, where this one will kill it right away. But like I said, has not been identified in Iowa, and we are actively looking. Last year in 2022, we surveyed about 13,000 maple trees and didn't have any suspects. We have not had anything that looks suspicious for the last several years. The last one we had was in eastern Iowa. We took it down. It had some of the exit holes that I'll show you in a little bit. And it turned out to be carpenter worm, which is a native pest. So key signs, well, the large beetle, like we said, with the long antenna. It's about 3/8 inch round exit hole, and they're going to be perfectly round exit holes. I hear a lot of times in literature they're dime size. I think they're a little bit smaller. You're going to find these most likely in maples. It's important to know about this pest because if you see anything that's suspicious, I'm going to provide a link at the end where you can kind of send in photos and we'll review it. And if it looks suspicious, we'll come out and take a look at it. And eradication on this one's a little bit different than maybe what we're used to. Any tree that's symptomatic comes down, and then all of the host trees, primarily the maples, in a 1/4 mile radius come down. In the next 1/4 mile radius, they treat them with insecticides. And they keep doing that until they don't see signs of the pest. And because it is a larger beetle, it's a little bit easier to predict where it's going than some like emerald ash. But if you look at where this pest has been in the United States, it was in Chicago as recently as 1998, and that was the closest one to us. That was eradicated in 2008. Just because that population is closest to us That town, if you look it up, is set up a little bit like Des Moines, where there's a reservoir to the north, and it is active right now in those reservoirs. So this is a population that's being heavily monitored, and eradication is in full mode still with the federal government, but it's been there since 2011. But this is a serious pest that we do not want to see in Iowa because it would be devastating to the maple tree. So let's look at the damage. There's a perfectly round exit hole, like we said, about 3/8 inch diameter. You can see all of the exit holes on these trees. When I say exit hole is when the beetle leaves the center of the tree and then comes out to lay its eggs and start its next life cycle. There you have the exit hole, a dime, like you can see. It is a little bit smaller than a dime, and then 2 beetles. All right, so here's a map where it was first found. So once again, it was in the Ravenwood area of Chicago, if you want to know pretty specifically. But in 2008, it was declared that it was eradicated. So you can see where the Ohio thing in Bethel is, where the eradication is going on now. Let's jump into emerald ash borer. I think we're all pretty.
Tivon, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
We're getting a little bit of feedback that the audio is kind of fading in and out.
We'll go into emerald ash borer and we'll see if that's a little bit better. So I think this is a pest that we're all familiar with. It's been through just about every aspect of Iowa right now. We'll go through the history of it and let me know if the sound gets any better or worse. So, all right, emerald ash borer, I'll refer to it as EAB. It's a common acronym. A small metallic green beetle. It's a wood-boring insect that likes to feed just behind the bark. That's native to East Asia and attacks and kills all fraxinus, all ash trees. It prefers a green ash, then it will go to white ash, but we see it also in black ash, blue ash, pumpkin ash, and white fringe tree. It arrived in the United States in the Detroit, Michigan area in 2002. Last year, DNR only looked at 9 counties. The only reason we didn't scan the other counties is we're down to now just, I think, 1 or 2 counties left that it hasn't been confirmed in Northwest Iowa. So we just look for the initial confirmation of when that pest is there. But right now, well, it says 93, but I think we are now up to 96 counties, 97 counties. So this number is up quite a bit. Last year, when I did the aerial survey, which is when we fly around the airplane and we look for the percentage dead of different types of trees, we mapped out 1,422,000 acres of ash trees. So this number is a little bit tough to understand. Those are the acres that had ash that were on them dying. Just keep in mind that isn't all 100% ash trees. So we don't have a good handle on the individual number of trees that have died yet. We know it's quite extensive. This is the emerald ash borer larva. It is a flat-headed borer, and you can see these little bell shapes on that white larva at the end of it. That helps diagnose it. If you were to peel the bark off the tree, you'll see that the borer likes to go in this serpentine or S-shaped pattern. That's typically how they feed, but when you have a lot of them, like this one, that pattern kind of disappears. They feed over each other, so it makes it a little bit harder to tell. So we're just going to go through this. This is kind of a spread rate map. This shows December 31st, 2002. This is everywhere we knew the pest was in the Michigan area. We now know that it was much further spread than what we have now. So I'm just going to go through several slides and we can watch this progress. So here we are in 2003. Spreads throughout most of Michigan in the southern half. Now we're in Ohio, Maryland, and we're just going to keep spreading across the nation. Now we're in Illinois in 2006. There's 7. Now we're in Missouri in 2008, 9, and then 2010. That is Iowa's first detection up in northeast Iowa on an island. It's called the Henderson Island series, but the island is shared with Wisconsin and Iowa. And Wisconsin had alerted the Department of Ag that, hey, emerald ash borer is on our side of the island. It's probably on yours, and sure enough, it was. So that was our first detection. Then we go to 2011. Iowa's still pretty clean, but moving across the nation, there's 12. 2013 was the big one. If you look at this map, you'll see that we had Burlington was confirmed and a few other counties in eastern Iowa. So originally we had a quarantine on the state for 1/3 of the state, with plans to try to slow the spread rate of it. And then that next winter, this is December 31st, well, actually it was, you can see it, Union County, that winter, I was out there with Department of Ag in Creston, Iowa, and we ended up finding an ash tree near the railroad tracks that was infested. And we were able in the wintertime to bark peel it and find the pest. And so that was when we got rid of the quarantines and just made it statewide. That's 2014. And then this is our current map. So we've added a few more counties in here. We can add Monona, Woodbury, and Plymouth into this map. I haven't got the most current in here, but you can see that this pest has spread throughout the state. And so that's kind of sealed the fate of ash trees. You know, I get asked this question a lot. Will we have ash in the future? And there's a big difference between this and, let's say, like emerald or like Dutch elm disease. Dutch elm disease, the elm bark beetle that carries the fungus that causes Dutch elm disease, it doesn't really attack the tree until they're 13 to 20 inches in diameter. It needs a good hefty bark load for that elm bark beetle to come in. Emerald ash borer will kill a tree as little as 1 inch in diameter, which makes management and the predictability of this pest very difficult. So it will be here. This is a lifelong pest. The Forest Service is doing a lot of work on genetic resistance, but we're not finding a lot right now. So this is just the percent ash in different counties, but it is a very common species in Iowa. It was the most commonly planted tree after Dutch elm disease. So, all right, we're going to switch modes here, and hopefully you can still hear me. We're going to talk about spongy moth. It went through its name change recently. It was formerly known as gypsy moth, and for years we've talked about this pest. I remember as a student, learning about it, thinking it would never get here, but that story is changing, and I'll show you some of that. So the spongy moth has a couple different types of species. The one that we talked about is from Europe, and it was introduced into Massachusetts in 1869. So there was a researcher there that decided, hey, this is the next greatest insect because the caterpillars produce webbing that was great for silk production. But when the Asian markets opened and they couldn't produce the silk at a cost-effective means, they opened up the greenhouse and just let all of these out. And nobody knew it was going to be a pest for several years. And then when they noticed it, it was too late. It was already established and going to spread. But I can't think of a pest that we have more management options and a better understanding of than spongy moth. So we'll show you some of that. So in 2021, it was changed to spongy moth over gypsy moth for cultural sensitivity issues for the Romani people. And this caterpillar is damaging to over 300 species of trees and shrubs. But if you want to look at all plant species, there's about 500 that it can actually feed on. But oak leaves are one of their favorite. And remember, the state tree of Iowa is oak. Years and years ago, the legislators couldn't decide, is it going to be white oak, bur oak, red oak? It's just oak. They picked them all. And all oaks are impacted by this pest. So you'll even see the caterpillars feeding on thicker spruce needles, which is kind of unusual. So last year we caught 252 male moths. The key there is male moths. The females don't fly, which is great. It helps slow the spread of this insect, and we can use that to our advantage. And I'll talk to you about that in just a moment when we get to that slide. This year we have 28 delimit areas, and basically that means, and all of our traps are set, and I'll show you what those look like. That means we had 28 areas that were kind of suspicious where maybe the moth could get established because we caught more than we expected. And so we'll watch those and we'll see what it looks like this year. Spongy moths here, you can see it's got its 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 blue dots and then a series of red dots on its spine going down. Those hairs can cause a lot of trouble for people with asthma and allergies. Here is its spread rate map. This has not been updated federally. I don't know why, but if we were to zoom into Wisconsin, there is only one county between Alameda County and us right now, and that's to the right. You can see that. The quarantines have gone up, and we have Crawford and Grant counties between us, and that's about it. So we are probably within the next 5 to 8 years of this pest making it into Northeast Iowa. So we're watching it closely. We are trapping. How does it move? We'll get into this as we look at this. So first one you see is August. You're going to see the egg masses. And late July, August, the moths mate, they lay their eggs, they hang on the tree, and they look kind of like what you see there. Almost like paper towel that made wet and slapped up against the tree. Then they hatch, and May to July, they're caterpillars, they feed, then you have the pupa stage, and then you have the moths, and the life cycle just keeps going. So this is some of the damage with the caterpillars feeding. This is a Pennsylvania photo. Everything brown there is from spongy moth feeding, complete defoliation. They've been battling this pest for quite a few years. This is from the Iowa infestation. We did have one outbreak of it in Jackson County back in 2013, I believe. And it took us a while to find them. We picked them up in our traps and we had to go out and hike around until we finally found the egg masses. It looks like it came in on some farm equipment. That's our best guess at the moment. But here they are defoliating an oak tree, and that's what they've left. Here's more pictures of them crawling up and down, and the picture to the right is not from Iowa, but it shows the females there with the egg masses underneath them. We hang out these traps. So to the left is what we call a delta trap. As we get more and more moths, we're going to have to hang out what we call milk carton traps. And it literally is just a cardboard milk carton that holds more. On a milk carton trap, every inch of moths is 100 moths. So to the right, we're looking at spongy moth. It has a beautiful chevron pattern, but they're kind of a muted colored moth. One that you don't really notice so much if you're out in public, but those antennae, look how feathered they are. It really kind of gives us a hint that this could be spongy moth, and this one is. So here are the traps hanging. We set traps out. We started in May. They were all set out by the 3rd week in June. We have probably about 4,000 to 6,000 traps. Let me think here. Closer to 4,500 traps statewide. And we'll start picking them up in August, and we go through them looking for those moths. Occasionally, we'll have an established population, and we'll go out with air tractors like this, and we'll disrupt the population. We prevent them from breeding by spraying the forest with the scent of the females. So that plane, that hopper, is filled with pheromone flakes. And here's a penny that shows a couple of those flakes. That's about how many flakes you'll get in about an acre of land. There's only 2 to 3 flakes, but they break down over a series of about 3 to 4 months and release the smell of the female, and it prevents the males from finding the females. They can't mate. There's no egg masses, and the populations crash. And it's one of the best ways to do this. And the best part is right now, paid for any treatment that we need with federal money through a foundation called Slow the Spread Foundation. And that's what's treating Iowa. This one is from Jackson County. So once we found it was fully established and a little bit bigger problem that we could handle, we knew that the flakes weren't going to work. We could maybe slow it down a bit, but it was going to get established in Iowa, and we had a chance to eradicate it. So this helicopter's flying all over some landowners here in Jackson County, and we're spraying a chemical called BTK, Bacillus thuringiensis. This BT chemical is used a lot in gardening and stuff like that. It is a bacteria. The K indicates that it's for caterpillars. BTI we use for mosquitoes and cities and stuff like that. And it was kind of interesting. This was our first time doing it, but BTK is produced in Osage, Iowa. And that's where the chemical came from to treat these trees. And it's highly specific to caterpillars, but we did had to monitor for the monarch emergence and other sensitive species. So we'd go out to the egg masses, watch for hatch, and as soon as we saw it, we would start our treatments. All right, we're going to jump into the next pest. I thought we maybe had a couple more years before we talked about spotted lanternfly, but that's not going to be the case if you watch the news releases from last year. So spotted lanternfly is native to China, arrived in, we don't know exactly how it arrived in North America, but we know it's probably in imported goods. They like to lay their egg masses kind of like spongy moth and things, and you may not know they're there until they hatch. It's a beautiful insect, but it is a sapsucker. It likes to suck the sap from the stems and branches. Usually doesn't kill trees, but it can weaken them. It leaves behind that sticky, sugary residue that we call honeydew. We associate it more with aphids, but this will do the same thing. That, promotes sooty mold growth, which is a black mold on trees. But most of it's pretty benign on most trees, but there are a few trees this will impact that we'll talk about. So we start out with egg mass. You can see it there in the photo. Then you have your first instar. At that first instar to the fourth instar, that area there, they look very much like immature box elder bucks. And I get a lot of photos in the spring thinking that it's this, but it wasn't. So we call them nymphs. They love Tree of Heaven. And when it was first found in Pennsylvania, we actually got a little excited. Ailanthus, or Tree of Heaven, is an invasive plant, not native. And we thought, hey, this could be great. Maybe it's going to control it. But then it moved on to other plants, and it really likes the grapes. And it might be kind of, I don't know if it's going to be decimating, but it's going to be pretty impactful to our grape populations, including our edible apples, hops, to a lesser extent, walnuts. But I think our grapes are really going to be impacted by this. So if you know a vineyard nearby, this is going to be an issue for them. So last year we found our first find. We detected our first find in Dallas County, Iowa, just outside. It would be northwest of Des Moines. A nursery there had called us and said, hey, we have something. I got the photo actually. And they said, we think this is a problem. And it was. So we went out and we inspected. All said and done, we only found 2 nymphs and no more. So our guess is it probably came in on something and that was destroyed. That nursery there is very vigilant about taking pallets and boxes and things that they don't need and incinerating them. And that may have stopped this from getting introduced a little bit faster. I don't know. But we know it needs tree of heaven to complete its life cycle to do it very well. And you can see the star for the preferred host are grapes. And that does include native grapes in our forest. So I think we're going to see this. It's going to be more of a nuisance. We're going to see this build up over the years. And you can get on YouTube and you'll see people taking water bottles and everything else and sucking up these plant hoppers, you know, just to get rid of them, just because it is a nuisance. There will be a lot of them. So like we said, we think it probably came into the United States from stone shipment. That's our best guess, but many have been observed in Korea right now. Here are some of the lookalikes. Spotted lanternfly at the top. You can see box elder bug. Tiger moth looks very similar. A lot of people get confused with that. Some of the stink bug nymphs that are native. I don't see as many leopard moths come in as I would expect, but that's one of them. That's a lookalike that's common in Iowa. They do pierce the bark while feeding. You can see the oozing sap and the honeydew excrement that comes out. Those will attract flies, wasps, hornets, stuff like that, but it will mold. But once again, none of that's really going to impact the tree a lot. The only time I would worry about it is if we had a heavy infestation on the tree and we stay in a drought. Most of Iowa is still in drought conditions, with western Iowa in that extreme drought condition. That's where I'd start worrying about these causing, you know, some impacts to the tree. And if you look really closely at that photo where the sap is, you'll see some of the spotted lanternfly on the bark of the tree. All right, this is an oddity. And I still don't know what to think about this, and I don't have a common name for this one yet. We're working with the University of Wisconsin on this Gretchiana species, which is a caterpillar that turns into a moth. It's been on the rise, first detected in 2021, and it just keeps moving up. Call it a triticid moth, and we're seeing it on black walnut. And let me show you some of the stuff it does. I mean, it feeds on the buds, but then it becomes a leaf roller. It webs the trees, and it's very interesting. That bottom left photo, if you look really closely, you can see one of the nymphs of the Gretchiana, but you can see all the way up and down the tree. It looks like cobwebs. If you feel it, it feels more like a plastic saran wrap type of thing. They do leaf roll. If you look up there, a lot of these will be defoliated. This is in the middle of summer. I believe this is Harrison County. We have a big population of this starting just a week ago up in Dubuque County that we're watching. And then another one in Backbone, which is Buchanan County, I think where that is. So I don't know what it's going to do to the tree. I'm a little bit worried about it since it's black walnut and repeated defoliation, but some states are reporting that it mysteriously disappeared just about as quick as it did appear. The reason I have this on the list is it is a native pest, and I want to track where it's at so we can kind of monitor what it's doing, what those impacts are, if we need to use controls and what those might look like. So if you do see this, please let me know. I want to report where it's at and map it out as best we can. The next one is also on walnut. This is an insect called walnut twig beetle. It's very small and has been associated with walnut mortality throughout the United States, but it has not been found in Iowa. This beetle actually comes from the southwest part of the United States, where researchers were growing walnut kind of off-site. And this twig beetle does what it says. It's supposed to just get into the twigs of trees and maybe cause a little bit of twig death, but not much. It became a primary killer because those trees didn't have any resistance. So they are tiny. The exit holes are there, but it's going to be hard to see them. I'll show you some pictures of it. These are underneath the microscope. And when I look for them, I look for those ridges on the head with the hairs that you see in the bottom left. So all of our trap samples came in just this last week. And sometime after the 4th of July, I'm going to be living down in my lab, just looking at all of these underneath the microscope. And hopefully we can figure out if we have any in Iowa or not. So far, we have not found any. So the walnut to the right is out west. Out west, there's a different thing that's going on. The beetles carry a fungus that we call thousand cankers disease. And it causes these little fungal cankers that you see there. We don't see that out east. Matter of fact, Indiana has the walnut twig beetle, and they did have one of the first detections of thousand cankers disease. And all the trees are recovering. So it's really a point of beetle management and not the disease management at this point. So, but if we see a dieback that's somewhat unusual, we like to know about it, and you can contact me. We move these traps around the state, and they work pretty good. We have a pheromone that's very specific to them. So walnut twig beetle, like I said, it's very small. It's about 1.5 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch at most. The pheromones were developed in 2012, and we've got some legislative funding that helps us trap for these and protect the walnut resources in Iowa. If you don't know, Iowa is in the top 10 to maybe even top 5 growers of black walnut trees. So here's an example of a funnel trap. This is what we trap these beetles with. So if you see them, please don't open them. We use something called a dry trap method. Some people use an RV antifreeze in the bottom to collect them. I'll show you what it looks like inside. I wasn't a huge fan. I know it's not supposed to be toxic, but I do have a little bit of responsibility, I feel like, to make sure that we're not dumping RV antifreeze in our pristine land. So we decided to try in 2012 a dry trapping method. So here's the trap folded up, back of my truck. That's the pheromone that goes in there. It isn't an alcohol base on this one, and it slowly emits the smell of walnut tree beetles out, and then they go into the trap. And if you look closely, this is that collection cup at the bottom. You see the pheromone pouches in there, and that white thing is a dog, flea, and tick collar. So we use that. It's a collar without a repellent. We don't want to send the insects away. It's just a kill strip. So when they get down there and they crawl on it, they die. And we've been using these since 2012 with pretty good success. We catch lots of different insects. I can't really point on here, but these are all way too big to be walnut twig beetle. There's some small ones in here that look very similar, and they're an ambrosia beetle, but we have not found any walnut twig beetle. So our traps start out in the spring. That's when beetles start to fly. They stop when it gets hot, so our traps are done in June, and then we bring them back in. We leave them out for 2 weeks, and then every blue dot on here is a spot that we place the trap. So this is our second largest trapping program. This is right behind spongy moth. And like I said, so far so good. We have not found this beetle. So let's jump into the disease world. I'm going to take a drink real quick. Oak wilt. I'm seeing oak wilt on the rise this year. It is the most damaging disease in Iowa of the oaks, and it will not devastate this species. We've had oak wilt around for years and years and years, and we still have oaks, and I would expect it to be there. It really comes down to our management practices, especially after storms. The disease is caused by a wilt fungi, Britzelia is the name of it. The fungi gets into the conductive tissues of the oak. So if you were to peel back the bark and get that wood underneath the microscope, it's like a series of straws that connect together, and then the water moves up there. The fungi likes to grow into those straws, plug it up. The top of the tree can't get water, so then you get the wilting look, hence the name oak wilt. So all oaks are susceptible. Red oak is by far the most acceptable. So red oaks would include true red oak, black oak, pin oak, and scarlet oak. They can be dead in as soon as a month. White oaks, they vary greatly. True white oak, I've seen them live for, some of them for their entire life, and they had oak wilt. Some of them for 10 to 15 years, and they've had oak wilt. Bur oak tends to be in that 2 to 3 years, and it's gone. Swamp white oak and chinkapins as well. So like I said, they vary a lot, and it depends on the species. But the white oaks, they have something inside those straws that we talked about that we call tyloses. It's this plant structure that they grow, and they can encourage it to grow in different straws, if you will, which prevents the fungus from moving through that tree so quickly. And that's why they're so resistant. But here are some red oak leaves that have oak wilt. They turn this copper color, if you will, before the brown. So if you don't look at the brown, look at some of those that are greenish, brownish color, that copper color, and they're pliable. They don't crumble in your hand. That's what I typically see with oak wilts, those leaves laying on the ground. The symptoms appear, in late spring, right about now, perfect time for it. As we get hot, the trees start to wilt very quickly. The leaves discolor. They start raining down from the tree, usually from the top and the tips of the branches, and they work its way down. The leaves on the ground, like I mentioned earlier, they're not completely dried up. They're bronze colored, most of them, and pliable. The top branches of the tree appear bare, and the leaves will continue to fall off into the trees, eventually completely dead. The xylem, which is right underneath the bark, could be discolored, and I'll show you a picture of what I'm talking about on that until we finally get to the death of the tree. So here's another example. Here's an oak wilt tree here, red oak. So here's the streaking I'm talking about. You can take a young branch, and not always, but often, especially in the red oaks, if you bark peel it a little bit, you'll see the fungal streaking underneath it, and that's what that brown is. It's not a good clear white area. And that is pretty indicative. We'll see this on Dutch elm disease infected trees too. So all of the wilt fungi kind of leave a streaking like that. This is the fungal pad. So the fungus moves into the tree by netadoodle beetles, and I'll show you some pictures of what those are, and feed on the sap. But once the fungus gets ready to kill the tree and wants to leave the tree and move on, it produces a pressure pad that breaks through the bark. And that's it there. It smells very much like a cantaloupe to me. So how does it spread? How does it get into a healthy tree? Well, there's a sap-feeding insect, and they're called netadoodle beetles, that spread the fungus through a wound in the tree. And that wound is going to be vital. We'll talk about that. But once the fungus gets in there, it can move from tree to tree below ground through root grass. And oaks like to graft their root system together and share root systems. In Iowa, netadoodle beetles are commonly called picnic bugs. If you go out to eat and you break out a sandwich, or you crack open a beer that's yeasty, they smell it. They like that yeasty smell, and they'll show up. And just like every good kid, and they're going to eat the dessert first, in this case, the oak wilt fungi, then they'll go feed on that sap in a wound on an oak tree and then inadvertently infect that tree. It's very important to understand there is no cure for oak wilt. I'm getting so many calls on it right now about, if I treat this tree, can I save it? You cannot. Once it's been tested positive, it's going to be there. There is some potential to break up the root grass by using a plow or a vibratory plow or trencher. In most urban areas that I work in, that's just not feasible. There's too many utilities and other things in the ground in the way. There are fungicides that are labeled for prevention, not controlling to get rid of it. You can't cure it, but to help prevent it. And an example of that would be alamo. Fungicol is another one. There's many propiconazole chemicals out there. And basically, if I have one tree that came out positive and the tree next to it isn't, they still could be sharing a root system. So if I take down that positive tree, the fungus is going to be on the move through the root system to the healthy tree. And before I take that positive tree down, I will inject it maybe with alamo to give it a chance to not have oak wilt develop. So I've seen varying levels of success. The hardest thing for oak wilt is getting a great sample up to the ISU Plant Diagnostic Clinic to have them test it. And that's the big thing. You really need to have it in the wilting area of the tree, but it has to be alive. So actively wilting. And I found that, about the diameter of your thumb to maybe double that, those are the best samples, especially if you can see that streaking. So the fungicides can be injected in, like I said, to the healthy trees to help prevent the spread. But all infected trees will eventually overcome. So here's an example of a root graft. So I did an experiment one year at the Iowa State Forestry greenhouse, and I planted a lot of oaks in the same container to see how likely they were to wood graft. And all of the red oak group, all of those other species that we talked about, they grafted together very well. The white oaks grafted together very well. So I wanted to see, if I took white oaks and red oaks, are they going to root graft? And I fully suspected that they would not. But in the end, I was wrong. They didn't do it as well as they would with their own species, but they did it very commonly, enough that I would be concerned about a red oak possibly grafting with the white oak in the field if they were close together. So, all right, let's talk about prevention. Prevention is really about pruning. And so if you see this, you have to prevent pruning your tree from, well, here it says April 1st to July 1st, but I'm going to tell you about, I think the best plan is March 15th, as you see that 4 sections down here. Pruning stops at March 15th and it can resume after October 15th. We want that tree to be fully dormant. There are risk periods. I get a lot of utilities call and they say, hey, we want to prune in July and August. Well, you can see there we're at medium risks. There is still some risk. And what about September? Well, if we're not dormant, if we don't have a good early frost, there's still a risk. So we have a website on the DNR page that you can follow when it's safe to prune by your zip code based on temperatures. And we also factor some of that in with the amount of beetles that are out there that can carry it. So this becomes a concern when we have something like the derecho. You have a lot of storm damage. You need to go out there and prune that tree just as soon as you can. If it broke and there's a wound. And this is one of the rare cases that I would recommend a tree paint. We don't recommend the creosote-based paints. They're toxic to the tree, but something like lac balsam, latex, or acrylic house paints, anything water-based, I would seal that wound as soon as you make that fresh prune, just so the water can come out, but the fungus can't enter if those sap feeding beetles, and nettle beetles come in to feed on the tree. It's kind of a dated picture here, but this is an example of an oak wilt being injected with the Alamo propiconazole to help prevent it from spreading from a nearby tree. So this is what it would look like. If you get down into the root system that's just below soil, I think you get a better uptake, that root collar area. But I see a lot of people that spend the money with hopes of curing it. You're not going to cure the disease. So not worth spending the money on it. Most red oaks die before the test results come back. That's something to keep in mind. So if you think you have it in a red oak and you send a sample into ISU to the diagnostic clinic, it takes 3 to 4 weeks for them to culture it out. And it takes about 3 or 4 weeks if they're going to do the DNA test as well. In that time period, your tree may be completely dead. But at least you'll have an answer and you know what you need to manage for. Many trees are moved without trenching, and in urban areas, I think that's going to happen. When we get into woodland areas, we do a lot of what we call chemical girdling, where you spray chemicals like basal bark spraying the tree to kill them, to make a kill zone where the fungus can't get through. So because it will continue to move through the root system, we just don't have a lot of great trenching options in Iowa. You got to get pretty deep to get some of these roots. So another thing I'm kind of battling right now is this is an Alamo injection. However, this is not, even if you put tons of these little cylinders around a tree, this is not enough inside of an oak tree to prevent oak wilt. And I see this being used for oak wilt prevention and bur oak blight treatments. And this is not the way I would go. So if you see this being offered, or if you have an arborist come out and say they want to use this method, I would probably walk away. It's not the best way to go. We're going to move on to bur oak blight. I was working with Dr. Harrington when this was first discovered. It's a regional leaf blight on bur oaks, and it was found in Iowa. Recently, we have found it on swamp white oaks, but we believe they probably are a little bit hybridized with bur oak. I don't know that I've seen it on a true, just plain swamp white oak yet. So, like I said, it was found in the late 1890s by Dr. Tom Harrington at Iowa State University. And if you look at the scientific name, the fungus is Tabackia, and its genus or its species is iowanensis. So, because it was found here. We see these leaf spots that start to brown in late July, and that starts at the bottom of the bur oak trees and slowly moves up, but the leaves persist through the winter and spring. They just hang on to the tree. Typically, bur oaks drop those leaves. Here are all the counties that we've had it confirmed in last year. I fully suspect it's in Clinton, Des Moines, Wayne, and Ringgold. We just haven't had it confirmed through ISU. Here it is regionally. Not the best map, it's from a book, but it is spread throughout the Midwest, and it's becoming more common to the point where we're not sure about where we should plant and not plant bur oak trees sometimes. There's 2 big bur oak trees here. I think these are highly treatable trees, and we'll talk about that looks like in just a second. Here are the leaves. You can see the fungus moving down the veins of those leaves into the midrib. Into the picture to the right, if you look at the leaf petiole where it's connected to the twig, you can see the fungus growing on it. And that's why the leaves hang on in the winter. It makes a great fungal connection. And then when the buds break next spring and that young, fresh leaf emerges, it rubs against those fungal spores and gets inoculated. And you can see that all here. So here's our typical dieback with bur oak blight. I got some leaves there. These leaves will be dry, unlike oak wilt. They'll be crumbly. And then you'll see those fungal spores. And you'll see the spores on the leaves too, and the damage that you wouldn't see with oak wilt. So that propiconazole injection I talked about, you can do that for bur oak blight, and it works quite well in urban areas. But out here, this is Les Hills State Forest with bur oaks. And those are bur oak logs that are being salvaged because it's just not feasible to treat in the forest. So the number one question I get is, what do we do? And I don't have an answer. We don't see resistance to it. Trees with bur oak blight, especially now in the drought, they're dying very quickly. And so out in the Les Hills, the manager there, Jeff Segal, is trying different oak species and trying to introduce them to the sites. There's a little bit of chinkapin oak on the site, so they're planting more of that. They try different species within the red oak group to see if they can grow on the soils there. But it is a tough one in the woodland areas. If you do treat it in urban areas, my experience has been repeatedly, you want the chemical in the tree as the leaves are emerging. If you go much after leaf expansion, you won't get the chemical to move to the top of the tree. So this is something you'd have to plan with an arborist ahead of time to get injected. So let's go to my biggest headache we are losing white oaks in the state, especially in the southeast, at an almost alarming rate, and I'm going to show it. It's been deemed rapid white oak mortality. It was first seen in Missouri, and then it's kind of moved its way up here. And you can have one oak tree to the right that turns yellow in July and it's dead about a month or two later, and the one to the left is fine. I don't believe it's oak wilt. We've tested many of them and they come back negative, but I'm working with the University of Minnesota right now. It's been developed. We're still trying it out, but these field tests where we can go out, they're based on a COVID test. Where I could go out with a drill into the trunk of a tree, take a little bit of sawdust from that tree, put it in a solution, and it will tell me if the tree has oak wilt or not in the field. And it will do that in about 15 minutes, which is much better than waiting 3 or 4 weeks. So once we get those tests, I want to try even more trees to completely rule out oak wilt, but I think it's pretty safe to say it's not it. Just more trees that are dying rapidly. The age range, I don't know. We see them in that most commonly in that 45 to 120 years age, but we see trees as little as 10 to 18 inches die too. So the reason that's important is, if it's an older tree, I might lean heavily towards root decay, other things building up in the tree. But, we scour for everything. The Forest Service has been researching this as well. And we don't really have one thing that's pointing towards it. So, and we may not when this is all done. It's always tough too when you have a bunch of trees dying and you don't know what the pest is. So you don't really know the management plan. But when we do see this, it shows in that lower slopes in the kind of the well-drained areas near the streams and works up the hillside. The soils, it tends to be worse when you have a slightly acidic soil, but we don't have a lot of those in Iowa. Insects, well, yeah, we find two-line chestnut borer. We find a little bit of ambrosia beetles. Diseases, we see things called hypoxylon canker. Some of the older trees have armillaria root disease. We don't know about this next one. It's called Phytophthora cinnamoni. It's a very aggressive root decay, if you will. Then there's other common leaf diseases there listed. But here's the Phytophthora that we were talking about. It is a non-native exotic root disease, and it can damage mainly the fine roots. It's documented well on shortleaf pine and a little bit on oaks out in Pennsylvania. And this became the target. When the University of Missouri St. Louis was looking at this, they really thought that Phytophthora might be the cause of it. So we've got some research projects that will help rule that out. We've partnered with the Morton Arboretum, and they got a federal grant. And hopefully this year in the fall, if not next year, they'll come in and they'll dig pits by these trees that are dying, take out the soil, and see if the Phytophthora is there. But it's hard to detect. This is what gets me. This is the amount of white oak mortality. And as you look at 2015, we made a big jump from 2014 to 15, and it's been kind of steadily increasing over the years. And I don't know what the cause is. We ran the statistics on it to see how this correlated with ongoing drought, and unfortunately, it did not correlate, and I did not expect that to be the case. We're going to continue to monitor that. If you have sites you're losing white oaks on actively, let me know, because we are going to do oak wilt tests, we're going to do Phytophthora tests, and we're also going to put out some traps that will look at all fungal spores in the air in those areas, just to see if there's anything unusual in there. All right, so now we're going into non-native plants that are invasive. And we're kind of making our final lap here, so bear with me. Top of my list, ornamental pears, especially Callery and Bradford pears. These things invade the forest edges. They're not shade tolerant. You see them along roadsides, fence rows. They shade out potential regeneration. The only thing that I see that works well is to spray down the bark of those trees with trifleclear. Garland is an example of trifleclear and diesel fuel. And just spray them down like 6 inches and they will die out. But everything here that's blooming, you see this a lot in eastern Iowa, those are non-native pears. So I see this as an invasive that's up and coming, but doesn't impact the forest a lot, just the forest edge. One that I see that's really impacting the forest are all of our Norway maple. And out of this, Crimson King and Schwedler, those are really big examples. The reason that's important is they're extremely shade tolerant, and maple syrup is a North American phenomenon only. The European maples do not have that sugar content. And so when wildlife needs to feed on that seed or that tree, the populations will crash. And they do hybridize, it looks like, pretty well. Once again, we're going to use a basal bark spray to try to control them, but it's very difficult. And here's an example of our Norway maple. And This here is a photo of Norway maple underneath the forest stand, and everything small there that you see is Norway maple. So this is one that I'm watching carefully. I think it's rising as a concern in Iowa, and it may be something that we do not recommend to plant in urban areas. We'll wait and see. All right, for our last pest we're going to talk about quickly, it's the biggest problem I see to Iowa's forest. This is our biggest threat. Oriental bittersweet, native to Japan, China, Korea. We have no native insects or diseases that really control this vine. It spreads pretty easily by birds and other wildlife that feed on the seeds of it. It was introduced in the late 1860s as an ornamental plant. It makes beautiful wreaths. The state legislature made it illegal to sell just a few years back. It's commonly referred to as a kudzu of the north. So if you've been south and you see the kudzu vines growing on the forest and up the telephone poles, this is very similar. Here is a picture of it. It has the yellow to kind of reddish fruit color there, multiple fruits on the stem, more of an oblong to very round leaf, and I'll show you kind of a difference. We do have a native bittersweet, and we do have resources that will help you find these. The reason I see this as a big threat, emerald ash borer is specific to Fraxinus, Asian longhorn beetle to acer with the maples. This is going to grow on anything it can, shade out the tree and kill it. And I see people actively managing it and not making a dent in it because their neighbors aren't managing it. So American bittersweet has more of an orange fruit. The leaves are more kind of ovalish, if you will, an oblong shape there. And there's not multiple fruits. There's a fruit per stem. So, and you won't see tons of vines with this one. This one's kind of rare to see in Iowa. First thing I learned when you try to control Oriental bittersweet, do not do prescribed fire, do not burn. Their root system is very aggressive. It will sprout, and you'll have even more. That root system is so aggressive that hand pulling doesn't do anything. You're not going to get it all. Torching early plants that haven't established works pretty well, but after that, basal bark spray with trifluclear and diesel fuel is about your only option. Being sure to spray only the vines and not the tree because you will kill it. So if you look to the left, you'll see a vine coming out kind of at a 45-degree angle up the tree. I see that so often with Oriental bittersweet. That's it getting started, a foothold. To the right, this is up at Backbone State Park, just to the north, Backbone State Forest. Those are some old vines. We got vines that are 30, 40, 50 years old that are strangling these trees. This is up in Backbone area. Everything you see here in the understory is Oriental bittersweet. Nothing else is growing there. The vines have killed most all of the trees in that area, and they eventually will kill the tree. We had contractors, or wipe out this forest and not just kill the tree. We had contractors hired as part of a grant, and it was $385 an acre to treat just some of the larger stems, but it didn't address anything in the understory. It's a very expensive plant to control. This is what it looked like after a fire. You get all of those root sprouts, and you get even more Oriental bittersweet plants at a denser rate to try to control. Here's a couple examples of the root system. That's why I said you can't just hand pull this when they're established. They have to be tiny, very aggressive rooters. This is Mr. Brown from Brown Forestry up at Backbone. He's out spraying with that trifluclear, trying to kill all of these vines. We use a blue dye to help indicate that that vine had been sprayed once. And, we did this for 2 years and we barely made a dent. So I'm going to end it there because I suspect you have lots of questions. We're going to tackle Oriental bittersweet and some of these other things at the next presentation because there are a lot of invasive plants that we have to start managing, but that one would be top of my list. So Jeff, I'll turn it back to you to see if we have questions or.
Excellent. Thank you, Tivon. That was a fascinating presentation, and I tell you what, I learned a lot. I actually want to ask right off the bat, you showed that picture at the end of Oriental bittersweet, and you said that everything on the understory was Oriental bittersweet. It had been infested that bad. So all of that stuff on the ground, that ground cover was Oriental bittersweet?
Just about everything there. There is absolutely no trees regenerating in that area in the plots that we looked at. We'll find a couple forbs, occasionally some cold season grasses, but it's pretty rare.
But it just blankets the area.
Yeah, it owns that site. So from a management plan, when I was talking to the forester that manages it, we don't have a lot of options. It's to take a huge area, clear cut it, spray everything that sprouts for probably 5 to 10 years to kind of keep that soil bare because the seed lasts a long time, and then go in there and replant. But it doesn't do any good if the neighbors around that area aren't controlling it as well. The wildlife are going to bring it right back in.
Gotcha.
And that's why I put it so high on my list. I don't see a great way to stop the spread of this.
Well, and that's a great segue into our first question here. Does Tordon on cut stems destroy the invasive bittersweet?
Okay, so Tordon will, but I would never ever use Tordon on anything.
Don't use
Tordon has what we call a flashback. And so it gets into the root system, kills it very well, but then it leaches out into the soil and it can flash back and kill other things, including mature trees, up to 5 years after that first use of it. So, glyphosate or Roundup works okay. I've seen a lot of chemicals that work okay. And what happens is Oriental Bittersweet has some sort of ability, I don't fully understand it yet, to wall off that chemical and continue to grow. However, when you mix glyphosate with diesel, and you can mix it with other things like Axit or kerosene, there's a lot of things in the label. We did over 200 acres of treatment over several years. That was the best mixture. Following the label for Trifol Clear with a little bit of diesel fuel, you spray about 4 inches of the bark around it, and it will kill the vine and root system.
And for folks that might be wondering, well, what the heck are you putting diesel fuel in the spray for? Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. So some chemicals, to get through the bark, they need a surfactant, and diesel fuel is a great oil to get in. Kerosene is usually another one that's good to get in. There's another product that's considered more environmentally safe called Axit, and it did all right, but the price-wise, it took us from $385 an acre to $472 an acre. It's pretty expensive. So this is the problem, and I don't know how to manage it in our lands. And we have landowners, especially north of Cedar Rapids, that have been fighting this for years. Lake Aquabi and Indianola. I can't really pick a lot of spots in the state where I don't know established populations. So this is going to be an impact that we're going to have to figure out.
Got it. Hey, question about oaks. Do any
Yep.
oak trees hold their leaves until late winter, or is that always a problem when the oaks hold their leaves longer, like with the bur oak blight, I imagine?
Great question. Bur oak blight. So bur oaks are one of those rare oaks that like to drop their leaves completely. The red oaks like to hang on to them. So just because they hang onto the leaves, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. But going out there, and especially if it's a bur oak tree, and plucking a few of those leaves off and looking where that leaf connects to see if you see those fungal spores, that might indicate that bur oak blight's there. And at the end of the presentation, I didn't leave that up. I'll send it to Jeff, and he can maybe send it to this group. The ISU Plant Diagnostic Clinic is a great resource. They will test it for oak wilt. They'll test it for a bur oak blight. They'll test it for all the common diseases we're seeing, and they'll give you a report on what it is and what to do.
Yeah, nice. Great presentation. Thank you, from Deb. She has a question on current status of buckthorn and two-lined chestnut borer.
All right, so buckthorn is still there. I mean, I don't know that it's getting so much more out of control than it's been. I guess it depends on where you're at in the state. It is one of the last, since it's a non-native plant, one of the last plants to lose its leaves in the fall. So buckthorn and honeysuckle, to me, are easy to manage. I can go through and just mist glyphosate or other chemicals in that area and completely take them out. And so we see Polk County Conservation Board, they've been doing that for years. They have an ATV with a mister on the back. Everything native's dormant, they go through, mist it, and then they kill them. And it works well, but it is on our invasive plant list, and it is a problem. So the other one, two-line chestnut borer. Two-line chestnut borer is in the same family as emerald ash borer, but it's a native. And you'll see that on oaks, but they're not a primary killer. It's a native. They're a secondary. They show up when the tree's dying from something else. So when we work with this rapid white oak mortality, I'm actually kind of shocked. I would expect to see a lot more two-line chestnut borer than what we're finding. We're finding some in there, but not enough to even kill the tree. But I've seen Tumwa area. I saw some trees in the cemetery that had oak wilt, and the two-line chestnut, they were white oaks. The two-line chestnut borer was what finally killed the tree, just because the tree was so stressed because of drought, oak wilt, and everything else. The borer took advantage and killed them. But they're here. They're always going to be here. If the trees are healthy, they're not going to kill them.
Great answer. Thank you. Let's see here. With all these threats, it's no wonder we have any trees at all. That's true. Absolutely.
I feel that way sometimes. If you go to iowadnr.gov/EAB for emerald ash borer, there is a list of trees to plant for Iowa. and it will tell you the cultivars, the height, the width, if they produce seed, growth weight, rate, the soils they like. We try to find a comprehensive list of suggestions if you want something for a yard tree. Your district forester can come out and help you with management plans if you have woodland trees.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, since you mentioned it, I have been told by state foresters that tree paints don't really work, that the tree will heal, wound itself. Your thoughts?
That's 100% true. I never paint a wound on the tree unless it's an oak. Okay.
Gotcha. That exception. Okay.
Here's the problem. A lot of the tree paints, what will happen is when you make that wound, you've got to let the moisture out. And when you paint it, that moisture gets stuck behind. And now you've got a decay pocket. And that tree, that decay is going to get in there and get into that heartwood. And you've started the clock on when that tree is going to die. Most cases, you want that liquid to get out. And that's why I don't use the typical creosote, that really dark black tree paint that they sell at most garden stores. You know, your acrylic or latex at your home are going to be the best. I like acrylics that lets some of that moisture out, but it'll prevent the fungus from getting in. So the only time I'd ever tree paint is with an oak during the growing season.
Getting that to prevent the fungus from getting into the wound. Got it. Okay. Great question. Even better response. Thank you, Tivon. Oh, this is very informative, but also depressing. So much death and so hard to save our trees between derecho and other threats. Oh, here's a question. The name of the spray, BTK. Now, BTK was for the caterpillar, and it's the BT for the insecticide for the dispar moths.
That is correct.
Okay, got it. Oh, do you know the current cost to treat for EAB?
So emerald ash borer, I can give you the cost for all of these things. Emerald ash borer depends. If your tree is underneath 20 inches in diameter, you can go to a garden store right now and buy a chemical called imidacloprid. BioAdvantage is a company that makes a common one. It's Tree and Shrub Advanced. You pour a liquid around the base of the tree or a pellet. It works very well to control emerald ash borer as long as that tree is less than 20 inches in diameter at 4.5 feet up, and you're out less than $20. But once it hits 20 inches in diameter or greater, you have to hire an arborist to come in and inject the tree with a chemical like triage or similar, emamectin benzenate, and that one will protect the tree for 2 years, and you need to re-inject in the third. And I like the idea of it, but I do see some problems with injections. So one is going to cost you $20, the other one's going to cost you $10 per inch of diameter, is state average right now. Sometimes lower, sometimes less. You can keep the tree alive, but we just said earlier, emerald ash borer is not going to go away. So you're going to have to inject that tree for the life of the tree. And anytime you have an older ash tree and you wound the base of it repeatedly, decay is going to set in. So in my opinion, it's more of a tool of, I'm going to keep this tree alive here for now, inject it, let's say 5 injections. You know, that's 15 years. Maybe I'm going to do 4 injections, but I'm going to replant another tree here for the future. So I'll keep this one alive until this one's large enough to give me shade and then take the ash down. And I think that's where it makes a lot of sense. I don't know that we can keep injecting every tree into the future, but some people are going to try it. We'll see how it plays out.
Great point. Excellent, excellent. Hey, another question here. What product do you recommend instead of Tordon for killing stumps?
Well, it depends on the tree species. So, you know, glyphosate Roundup works very well on most species. If you're going with an aggressive tree like Tree of Heaven, likes to sprout, the white cottonwood that we see, the European cottonwood, I think that Garland, that Trifle Clear, works very, very well.
So Triclopyr, and I think Garland is that one of the name brands there. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of these, you know, there's an aquatic version. So Garland has one called 3A. So if you're near water, you don't have to worry about runoff causing anything. Roundup as well has an aquatic version called Rodeo. So there's many options out there. When you go to your farm store, your chemical dealer, your garden store, wherever it may be, work with them and they'll give you some of the options.
Got it.
There's another place you could go to the internet. It's greenbook.net. Okay. And you can type in any disease, any insect, it doesn't matter what plant it is, and it will list every chemical out there that's licensed to be used on that. And you can go through it. It can be overwhelming, but if you want a starting spot, it's kind of nice.
Got it. Glyphosate. Now, would you mix that at the regular rate somebody on the farm to spray weeds with? Is that at a full rate, for instance, or a reduced rate? I've heard sometimes 10% solution. Any insight there? Or?
It depends if you have it concentrated or not. If it's concentrated, you can dilute it down to the 3%. And on most species, you'll get good control if it's going to resprout. If it's an aggressive resprouter like Tree of Heaven, I would probably leave it at the concentrate and just paint that 3 inches behind the bark.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Are you aware of any groups looking into biological controls of Oriental Bittersweet? And is there anything that looks promising for controlling it in the future?
So this person needs to be my best friend right now. So within the federal government, there's a group called the TAG group, and I don't remember exactly what it is, but they research potential biocontrols that they could bring in, and then every state then has to research, is there something else it could attack and that's native in your state that it will actually kill? We don't want to bring in something that is going to devastate the crop. So a good example of where TAG is probably working well is in the garlic mustard world. They have a few insects there that can help control it. We haven't had any released in the Midwest. I'm not even sure in Iowa yet, or in the United States yet. Minnesota may have done some, but it's been approved. There isn't anything yet with Oriental Bittersweet, and I've been shaking that quite a bit. I would like more research in this area from the federal government. I know that a couple of the items that tested pretty well that look like they might be great for biocontrol would decimate Oriental or native bittersweet. So it's not being used, but there's got to be something else out there. We are not seeing anything here that's helping with it. Not so far, but we're keeping an eye out. But I like this idea. I think it's the only way to really get on top of this pest.
Great question, Tom. Absolutely. Oh, someone was looking for some clarification. Can you clarify the issue with Tordon for stump treating? I don't think I understand the problem with it. Maybe I didn't type it in.
So Tordon doesn't break down for a long time. It takes about 5 years for its half-life. And so when you treat it, that root system starts to, because it kills the stump, then goes into the root system, kills it. Those root systems start to decay, and that chemical is released into the soil. So if a healthy tree or other plant nearby's root system grows into that contaminated soil, it is strong enough to kill that tree. We call that a flashback, where it's killing things you don't intend to kill. And you have that risk for about 5 years after you use it. And you don't have that risk with other chemicals out there. So it's unfortunate because Tordon is diluted down. You can get RTU, which means ready to use. It's affordable and it's available to many people, but it really isn't the best option.
Great answer. Okay. If you have already sprayed an American elm, can it be removed or corrected?
So are they spraying it? I'm trying to figure out what they're spraying it for.
Terry, give me a little bit more information here. If you've already sprayed an American elm, can it be removed or corrected? We'll give just a second.
If it has Dutch elm disease, you could dispose of the wood any way you want it. There is a chemical called Arbortech S and generic versions of it that work quite well if you want to inject American elms and keep them alive. The re-injection is every 5 years, so a little bit further apart than with emerald ash borer.
Oh, he said a bunny damaged the bark in regards to the American elm.
We see this a lot where a rabbit will go in and that snow line girdle the tree. Euonymus, what's another, I'm trying to think of another one, burning bush. You'll see that a lot on, and they'll completely live. The tree will put the bark over that girdled area and make it. And American elm's pretty good at that. And so if it didn't die, there's a chance it could make it. If it did die, then they've got pretty deep on it. So it varies a lot. But once the tree's dead, you can take it down and use it for whatever you want. The Dutch elm disease fungus is throughout the state. It's airborne, so we're not terribly worried about it.
So then Dutch elm disease is still present. It's out there. Now, you can break it down for me. I see we're replanting elms. So what's going on there?
So I'm on the fence on this. We do have some great elms, and they are resistant to Dutch elm disease. And you can buy these cultivars in your nursery now. But there's a couple things I want to watch of them. First of all, we have a very biased view of what American elms were. I think we forgot about how much pruning they needed to get that nice V-shaped. They like to have a lot of included bark and split if you don't do that. So it is a tree that requires a lot of upfront maintenance, and that V shape makes them wider than maybe what we have room for today. And it depends on the cultivar, but when a tree's cultivated, the top is not always the same as the bottoms. That root system may not be resistant. And so what we've done in Northeast Iowa is we're trying to bring these resistant cultivars in so they hybridize with our native, so we have some resistant trees. However, we know that if that infected root system from a native tree grafts on to that resistant tree, the root system is not resistant, and that resistant tree will die. So you do need some space for them. I would use them sparingly. I would use them in open areas, maybe a park. You don't have another elm tree along a forest edge that is dying from it that could bring it in. I do think with the elm introductions we're doing in Northeast Iowa, we're going to see fully resistant elms come back over the years.
Along the same lines now with Dutch elm fungus, does the propiconazole protect at all?
It does. I don't think it works as well in the nature of the fungi that's in there as the Arbortech product. It is labeled for it. I think you're only going to get about 2 years of protection with propiconazole over the Arbortech.
Got it.
It's just like different. Even with the Arbortech, I'm saying Arbortech S because that's a 5-year formulation. They do work. I just think it works a little bit better.
Got it. Hey, Tivon, Carrie wants to know, repeat the chemical you can buy in the garden center for EAB treatment on trees under 20 inches in diameter.
It's imidacloprid. It's IMID, and I'm not going to even try the rest without typing it out.
I can spell it, yep.
And then I was going to try to put it in chat, but I don't have chat ability here. But yeah, it's any garden store will know what it is. It's commonly used. It's what we call a neonic. So let me explain what that means. There's a big movement to stop neonic because these neonicotinoids will harm the bee populations. However, ash is not a flowering tree that will impact the bees. So we don't have a fear with it on ash trees. I would not use it on a linden tree because they do flower and they would have a huge impact on the bee population.
Excellent description there. So great. Okay, more Tordon questions. What should be used instead of Tordon? And I think we talked about glyphosate with some diesel as a carrier.
Garlon, there's a whole slew of things that could be used.
Garlon, the triclopyr.
Yep.
You know what? I am almost positive that Jesse Randall, when he was at Iowa State, did a publication on some common types of things. Maybe I can include that link and maybe consult with you. You might have another resource we can include in the link for the follow-up on some different options there. And then, of course, you're going to talk all about this coming up later in August here too. So,
especially with non-native invasive plants.
Yeah, put that on your calendars, folks. A lot of great questions here. Oh, there was a question about what we want to plant to replace for ash trees. You had a great plug for the DNR publication on all the different possibilities, from the oaks to the lindens to the hackberries to Kentucky coffee trees and everything in between.
I think it's a great ending question here. There isn't an answer. There is not a simple right answer that I could give somebody over the phone. So when you're going to pick your tree, you're going to want to look at its mature size. What's its height and its width? Do you have enough space for that tree to grow in the long term? Then the next thing I would do is look at the soils. What type of soils you have? What type of soils does that tree want? And then this part here is so important. I would go outside and look in my neighborhood. If I see maples all over the place, I am not planting the maple. We know there's another pest that's out there on maples. If I see lots of hackberries, I'm not going to plant a hackberry. I'm going to try to find something that's unique and different to try to keep diversity in our neighborhoods. I want to see less than 10% of any tree species out there, or 20% by genus. When I say genus, I'm talking about like no more than 20% of my community is going to be maples. No more than 10% will be silver maples, so your red maples or any, you pick it. So you're going to go pretty low on that other number by species. I would diversify as much as you can. I have a smaller yard here in town, and I have 7 different species. And I think that's the way to diversify. If a pest comes in, I'm not going to lose them all at once. A great example, and this place pains me, Polk Boulevard in Des Moines. If you've ever been on it, it's sycamore lined. Beautiful closed canopy sycamores everywhere. So if we go back to our ALB, Asian Longhorn Beetle presentation, that was one of the pests that can impact sycamore. And if it ever made it to Iowa, that entire street will be empty, just like the days of Dutch elm disease. If they diversified and put some other things in there to get that beautiful closed canopy, that wouldn't be an issue. So that species diversity will save your yard. My number one question every single day, Tivon, is there any assistance to remove ash trees? I had a gentleman, he was in his 80s, retired, and on Social Security, and he had 61 ash trees on his acreage that he had to take down. And his bid was $2,000 a tree.
Ooh.
I don't know how you do it. I really don't. If they weren't all ash, he wouldn't have such a big bill.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I missed a question from Stephen, so I need to ask it here. Is there a good RWOM publication?
That's the rapid white oak mortality.
Yeah.
The Forest Service does have a new one out there, but it's really pretty vague. It's saying basically we don't know what it is, and here's everything we look for. So just real quick to reiterate, we're going to go out in the next couple of years. We're going to sample for all the fungal spores. We put these traps that funnel air through into a liquid. We look at that liquid. We're going to get a good glimpse of any fungi that's out there, including that Phytophthora species. The Morton Arboretum is going to come in. They're going to dig these big soil pits, look for different decay fungi in the roots, test that soil for that Phytophthora cinnamoni. And we're also working with the University of Minnesota on these oak wilt kits where you can drill into the tree, get a sample, instant reading in the field if it's oak wilt. So our goal is to kind of do that Sherlock Holmes method when you remove everything else. I'm hoping there's one thing left. And I thought I had this graph in there, and I didn't. I apologize about it, but I have a kind of a nice graph that shows the drought impact of trees. And I am so surprised with this ongoing drought that it isn't contributing to the white oak death. So I thought it was going to be a part of it, or at least an answer, and it doesn't look like it will be. And that came from the Forest Service. It's the FIA, which is the Forest Inventory Analysis Office. So everybody's working on it. We've got a large team. This is the most momentum I've ever seen kind of happen. But when you remember that graph, 2015 is a pivotal year. Something happened in 2015 to the white oaks that's causing this continuous decline. Whether it's fungal or something else, I have no clue yet. So it is a mystery that I would like to solve. Let's see if we can figure it out.
I love the Sherlock Holmes analogy. You're on the case. Excellent.
I am. I'll do my best.
Hey, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Tivon, thank you so much for being our expert today. You are a wealth of knowledge, and really look forward to having you back in August. Again, just real quick, folks, this will be recorded. We'll have it posted